Hello and welcome from Bogota, Colombia, to this episode of Crossing Borders with Nathan Lustig, where I have conversations with entrepreneurs doing business across borders and the people who support them, with a special focus on Latin America. My guest today is Mayer Mizrachi, a Panamanian entrepreneur who's lived a life crossing borders and overcoming obstacles to get what he wants. His story is the most incredible of any Crossing Borders podcast yet, and I don't say that lightly. We've had people who've slept in cars to get what they've wanted and to start their startup, but this is really one that tops it. Mayer overcame a childhood health issue that forced him to grow up in hospitals and doctors' offices in London until he was successfully treated at the age of 17. After going back to Panama, he studied at universities in Europe and the US and then started his entrepreneurial career. What started as a routine government contract turned into a nightmare. While living in the US, Mayer decided to take a trip with his friends to Colombia. When he got off the plane, he was taken into custody on an Interpol Red Notice issued by Panama for supposed government corruption and spent the next 5 months in a Colombian maximum security prison before being taken back to Panama, where he lives today, and he's not allowed to leave. We talk about how something like this could have possibly happened, how his health issues as a kid affected his outlook on life, how he launched his startup and got $500,000 in venture capital funding in Silicon Valley while he was in prison, some of his stories from the inside, and including even doing an angel investment from his cell. This is an incredible story, and I really enjoyed talking to Mayer, not just about what he's been through, but his business, Criptext, and his outlook on life. I hope you enjoy this podcast. Hello, Mayer. Welcome to the podcast.
Nathan, thanks for having me.
No, thanks for taking the time to do it. So, where are you in the world today?
So I'm in Panama City, Panama.
Very nice. You're the first entrepreneur from Panama that's on the podcast. So, what's it like in Panama?
Hot and humid. We have two types of weather here in Panama, and it's hot and humid and wet and humid. That's it. Right now we're in hot and humid mode.
And so, what are you working on in Panama?
So I am working on. Well, I started a company when I was in New York back in 2014. Company's called Criptext, and we started as a secure messaging app. As after we saw that secure messaging would become encryption in messaging would become commoditized as it has, we we pivoted into secure email. So right now we have been developing the world's most secure email service. Um, we've been under development since November. We closed a seed round in November with investors from Silicon Valley, and they came down here. They saw the company, they saw what we wanted to do, and they said, you know what, we love it. It's different. Let's do it. And we're 2 months away from launching. Yeah, less than 2 months. So we're planning on launching this on August 15th. We have been on stealth mode heavily. We haven't said a word about what we're doing, and we're not even given details as to how is this so secure, what makes it so different from anything else that's out there. But when we launch, it's pretty much going to be very impactful for the world, the entire world, because privacy has played a big role this year. I would say people have become a lot more privacy conscious. And beyond that, they have found vulnerabilities in PGP encryption on email. So this is all kind of really set the tone for what's going to be an amazing launch.
No, it sounds exciting. And so there seems to be a decent amount of encryption / VPN / those types of technologies in places like Panama and Switzerland. Do you think that there's a potential for kind of like a security cluster for tech in Panama?
I think not, and I think the whole Switzerland and Panama, the privacy laws, all those things that make these countries unique, they're slowly dying down. And the reason is because, well, if you think about banking privacy, there is none anymore in Panama. Thank you, Panama Papers. Thank you, OECD. And Well, not even in Switzerland either. Switzerland was known for their private banking laws, and you can't get you you can't get that anymore. So if we use that as a proxy for data privacy, um, then you can almost assume that nowhere is secure or private, um, for for creating like a cluster of uh, privacy focused companies. In fact, one of our big competitors, what's his name? Proton Mail. Yeah, Proton Mail. Their main value proposition is in their tagline. They say encrypted email based in Switzerland. So when your main value proposition is a jurisdiction, that means that your technology is not your main thing. It means that it's pretty generic, which it is. They use PGP, and you know 10 years from now, 5 years from now, who knows? Even it may be happening today, depending on what country is requiring the information. Data might be shared with governments or government institutions. So I don't think there's going to be kind of like a Switzerland of security. Maybe Israel is going to be interesting just because they really know what they're doing over there in cybersecurity.
And how did you get interested in cybersecurity? Was this something that you were always interested in, or that came up along the way?
Not really. I wasn't really ever interested. It all started because when I started, I was I was doing my master's degree at American University in Washington D.C. And I started building my first app, and I had this great idea for an app, a messaging app that would replace BBM. Back then, this was like 2011, and WhatsApp hadn't really gotten that popular back then. And we were all using Blackberries, or at least most of Latin America was still on BBM. And the big pain was as soon as you lost or changed your device, you had to like publish your PIN on every other social media platform to make sure that people would add you. You had to manually add every person, not by name, but by an numerical PIN number, which is very complicated. So I said, you know what? What if we build a messaging app that worked across all three platforms, BlackBerry, iOS, and Android, where you would just log in with Facebook, and anyone who's your Facebook friend is automatically your contact on this app. And I raised $100,000 to build that from friends and families and pools. Um, and we got late to market. A company called Beluga launched like 3 months earlier than us, and they immediately got picked up by Facebook. That became Facebook Messenger. So it was kind of like my first iteration at a so close to victory kind of feeling. Um, but I continued on with my messaging ambitions, and I realized that there was still a market in messaging, but I had to focus on giving a different value proposition. Social messaging was already being standardized. So I I said, the whole WikiLeaks things started happening, and this was like fast forward 2 years later. Then the Snowden situation took place, and I said, you know what, encryption, maybe that's the thing. So I was living in Panama at the time. I was working banking while I was running Jiggle, which was that social messaging app which I started. I was running it on the side. Um, and then I applied to this accelerator program in Miami called Venture Hive, and we got accepted. So I went to Miami, and we applied with this vision for an encrypted messaging app. Um, and like 2 months after, I mean 2 weeks after I got to Miami to the program, the director of the program asked me to go with her to Panama. That she was going to present this Venture Hive program to the government of Panama. Um, and she wanted to use me as kind of like a poster child of the brain drain that is happening in Panama because they don't have such a program, which made sense. So I went, and I said, yeah, so this is me. This is what I'm doing, encrypted messaging, and it just so happened to be that they had a situation where WhatsApp messages had been leaked, and they, you know, that basically kind of led me to believe that I was onto the right path. I said, you know what, security, there's a huge value for it, and people are willing to pay for it. I was used to building for 3 years. I had been building software that was free, and I would always postpone or put off the idea of monetization. But when it came to security, I said, this is something that you could license. You could really sell this, and people would pay for it.
So that conversation ended up being a very pivotal one for you. And I want to jump back into your history before we go into
Yeah,
that story. So, are you from Panama originally?
I am originally from Panama. My mom is Jamaican, and but I didn't grow up really in Panama. I mean, I did, but I had to spend most of my childhood in London. I was very sick as a child, and I had this very weird disease, autoimmune disease that was only found in 90-year-old men, and it was a terminal illness. They had never seen it in a child, so I was like this lab rat in the UK. So I basically spent a lot of time. I survived that, and I spent a lot of time in London, and that's probably why I'm not your typical Panamanian or typical Latin American entrepreneur.
Wow. So, how did you end up getting cured?
So they took a shotgun strategy, because I was literally an experiment. So they started. I was at the cancer ward because I was being treated with immunosuppressants and chemotherapy, and it was a really tough time for me as a child. I was, what, 10 years old. I had a twin brother who was growing up, and I had been like kind of stalled in my physical development, and I had to live in this ward, and like my friends, they would literally die off. Okay. um, and it was very difficult for me as a child to kind of like befriend people, because I would fear that they would disappear, they would die, because it happened quite often to me while I was that period lasted about 8 years, from when I was 9 till I was 17. And they were throwing everything at me and seeing what stuck. Um, so there was nothing on the books that could. It had never been cured before. Let's start there. It was called the disease is called polyarthritis, uh, vasculitis polyarthritis nodosa. So it's a degeneration of the blood vessels. So as you can imagine, it affects every single part of your body. So I had a tough time growing up, and I think, but also I guess that I was always very positive throughout that situation. I was always very optimistic, and thank you, South Park, for making me laugh for those years, I would say. Yeah.
And what would you say, if anything, that you learned or that you use or that changed your perspective that is still with you today based on that childhood of growing up like that?
Um, I would say that the one thing that stuck by me, and listeners will understand that this wasn't the first bout that I had to fight through in my life. That things got even more complex later on. But the one thing that has stuck with me since my childhood has been that optimism. I was always listen. I was the kid that would go and buy a lottery ticket, and I was 100% sure I was gonna win. And even when I lost, I said, "No worries," because I wasn't trying. I'm gonna go again, and I'm gonna beat it. And this was kind of like my attitude towards video games, towards everything. I would go to a doctor's visit, and they would say, "Sorry, Meyer, we're gonna have to keep you for another month." I said, "That's fine. I can do another month, but after that, I'm gone, right?" Yes, I know. And so I always kept this kind of like happy, funny attitude. I would say humor is the number one medicine. It's not just a medicine, but it's a lifestyle. Like if you look at problems from a funny angle, you won't suffer. You won't let them. You won't let them hurt you that much, because yeah, life is full of problems. Everyone has problems, financial, health wise, legal, you know, personal, whatever it is, you just got to learn to live with them. So I kind of befriended my problems, and that's, I would say, the one thing that I still do today is, as soon as I come into a big problem, I go, well, at least I don't have, I don't know, chlamydia. Like I'll go, I'll say something, some type of punchline like that, just to loosen my own mood. So that's it.
That's a great attitude to have. So, as a 17-year-old who's just been through this, what was your next step? What did you do after that?
So my next step was, now I had to reintegrate into, I had to go back to Panama, and I had to reintegrate into the Panamanian lifestyle, and that was very difficult because, number one, I came back, I was really fat. Um, I was weighing I was weighing about 170 pounds, 180 pounds, 17, and I don't know, like 5 foot tall. That's it. I was 5 feet tall. That was it. And it would take it would take time before the effects of the medication would wear off. And that was basically all the cortisone treatment that would bloat me, would make me, just retain a lot of water, and I just grew very fat, and it would just stop you from growing up, also from developing. So from when I was 17 to when I was 18, throughout that year, my life, like day by day, I was like one of those plants that every time you wake up in the morning is just like taller and taller. And I'm not a tall guy, FYI. I'm like, what, 5'8", but I was slimming down. Weirdly enough, I don't know if it's because I kind of became more socially less socially awkward, but I started doing worse in school as I got thinner. So I was pretty certain that this medication I was on was kind of like this hyper drug that later, we could define as a kind of like an Adderall of sorts. I don't know, but I was a triple A student. Okay, and then all of a sudden, when I was 18, I could barely graduate from high school.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you finished high school, and then where did you study?
yeah. So I went a bit all over. I wasn't, everyone around me, including my own brother, my twin brother, everyone went to the U.S., and they did the typical, U.S. style university. I went to Rome. So I spent first I first spent a semester at London School of Economics, but there were too many bad memories, too recent, to stay there. So I moved to Rome, and I was there for 2 years at American University of Rome, and that's when I realized that Rome was basically like a Latin American country in in Europe. It was very close to home. I have to say there was something comforting about the bureaucracy and the dysfunctionality about its society. Um, but I spent 2 years there, and right after that, I decided, you know what, I'm ready for the big leagues. Let's go to um, an American school. Let's go to the U.S. and focus on what I'm going to do for the next 10 years of my life. And I moved to American University in D.C. That was in 2008. Um, and that was amazing. That was amazing because for the first time ever, I was kind of like a normal person. I wasn't like a normal person in relation to the people who I grew up with. Like I was doing the same thing as everyone else. I was in an American school at the right age, and I felt pretty normal. And I guess I had that itch at the time where I wanted to be different. I wanted to do something different. And I was always a nerd because of the medications I took growing up. I wasn't allowed to play sports, contact sports, or I basically had to. I had to stick to video games, and not that I mind it because I love video games, and I think that's the reason, because that's all I did when I was growing up. So being a techie, I decided I wanted to build my own app, and that's how Jiggle started. I was doing my master's, and it started with the app world.
And what did your family think when you decided that after studying and getting your master's that you were going to go start something on your own rather than, say, taking a more traditional approach to your career?
So my mom didn't like it. My mom saved me from that certain death. So she has always been very overprotective. And she always wanted what was safer for me. So I was kind of like her bubble boy, and she was scared immediately. She was like, "No, take a job, just be happy, be comfortable." I said, "No, no, 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 no. I'm happy, I'm comfortable. I can do that and this. I can be happy and comfortable doing that." My dad thought I was nuts. He didn't know anything about technology. Um, he was your typical Latin American merchant, right? Uh, my dad is of very strong Jewish descent, like Sephardic Jew, so Arab style, right? So buy low, sell high kind of thing. That's their lifestyle. So when I said no bits and bytes, he says, "What? How do you make money with that?" So everyone was scared, but I managed to con my uncle, my mother's brother, into investing in my idea, and and he has backed me ever since with seed capital for every one of my projects. I would like to say that he's gotten a return on his investment, but I would say that the largest return he's ever gotten has been a T-shirt. Yeah, very expensive T-shirts.
I'm sure he's gotten some nice education out of it as well, though.
Yeah. No, no, no. I mean, I would say that he got into the venture world because of that, and now we co-invest together. And let's just say that you sometimes lose money to make money, maybe some of that, or maybe it's just the price of education, as you said. You learn, you gain experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So let's fast forward back to that meeting in Panama when you were looking to potentially help the government with secure messaging. What
Oh yeah.
happened next?
All right. So this is where it gets interesting. Okay. Um, Parenthesis. At this point, my parents have been divorced for over 10 years, and my father is married to a lady um, who is the sister of the current president in Panama at the time. Right? Actually, he wasn't even married. He was just going out with her. And so I'm in Miami, and I come back to Panama, and I stand in this meeting with all these old guys who were, I don't know, government people. And I tell them my story. I said who I was, and I said what I was doing. And at the end, the Minister of Technology said, could we have a meeting with you separately? We'd like to discuss something to do with what you're doing. And in that meeting, they explained to me that they've been looking for a solution for a messaging network for the government, like a messaging app just for the government employees. So I said, listen, like, yeah, I could do it. Like, yeah, we could do it. He said, well, perfect. Why don't you give us a formal proposal and we'll evaluate it. So we went back and forth. This was 2013, and by February 2014, we sent them a proposal. They liked it, and they said, "You know what? This sounds fair. Let's do it." So we sold the government of Panama the software for 100 users for $200,000, and it was a steal because that year we had raised $500,000 that year just to build that entire thing, and we were able to do that thanks to that government contract. It was kind of like you get a government contract, you're in the big leagues. That is a validation that you are doing things right, right? Um, and we give them the software, and we sell it to them, and they're using it for throughout the entire year. Then comes August 2014 of the same year we delivered, and there's a change in government. There's a new government in place, and they changed the minister. So I I realized that as soon as they change the government, the usage of the app starts declining steadily, and then by September, no one's using the app. I realized something's going on, so I reached out to the government. I said, "What's going on? Let's meet." So we met with them. I explained to them what we had done with the previous government, what the software was all about. I said, I'm pretty sure that you guys had a hand of the sort, but I'm happy um, to guide you, to hold your hand, and teach you everything about the software to you and your people. Um, and they never replied. They never reinitialized the use of the software, and then by October, after like 4 emails that went unreplied to by the Minister of Technology, I sent him a very wholehearted email saying, "Listen, this is not fair. This software was paid for by taxpayer money, and it's not fair that people with their blood and sweat are paying for this, and you are not using this. So please, number one, tell me what I have to do to make you see what's in value, what's the value of the software, and number two, I'm going to go ahead and assume that the change of government, kind of like didn't give you time to get involved. There's just so many mix-ups. Okay, I'm going to give you 6 months extra, a free use of the software." And never got a reply to that email. In fact, the only reply I ever got was the only communication I ever got from them after that September meeting was a subpoena, um, in January of 2015. By then, I had been living in New York, and we had started with our email software because we couldn't modify or resell the messaging software because it was still in use. All right, we still had a contract with the state. Um, so so I got a subpoena and immediately laughed because the subpoena was on the basis that we never delivered the software, so we stole government money because we got the money and we never delivered the software. And I laughed because I said, well, I have all the data that shows not only that they used it, but who used it, when and where, and from what device. Um, so this was just really funny to me at the beginning, and I never believed that it could become as complex as it did. Um, so fast forward to June, and we raised $600,000 to launch Criptext for Gmail, which is an encryption solution for Gmail, and we got on the cover, on the front page of Business Insider. We were top dog in WeWork in New York that year, and we were at TechCrunch Disrupt in New York that year as well. It was just, we had the win, the win was on our back, and so fast forward to November, and I go get my investor visa. Um, Finally, kind of like legitimizing my stance, in as a U.S. entrepreneur. Um, and I got it perfect. I go back to the U.S. and I wait a month before I travel to Colombia for New Year's, with my friends. And when I get to Colombia, I get stopped. This is where it gets good. So, immigration police says, "Sir, it looks like there's a Interpol Red Notice to your name. You must be some real bad fellow." And I laughed. I thought that was some type of joke. And then things got serious. I took things very lightly initially, and then things got serious, and I started getting scared because this was Colombia. This was not, this was not Texas. You didn't know what could happen there. Um, and yeah, things got very hairy very quickly. Um, I got arrested.
What's a red notice for people that don't know?
Yeah. So basically, the Interpol, number one, the Interpol is kind of like the international police, right? It's an organization that helps the police organizations globally, to catch fugitives or people that are wanted by the law. Um, and the Interpol has notices, right? They have different colors. They've got like blue, they've got green, they've got orange, and they got yellow. And the worst of all is a red notice. And a red notice is reserved for dictators, for serial killers, for terrorists and drug cartels. And that's what I had on me. And I didn't know this at the time. I'm explaining it now, but at the time I thought well, I guess there's only one color. But yeah, it was even crazier when my lawyer got on the phone with me and said, "Why, there's a red notice? You realize that that's what El Chapo had?" And when you put it that way, you realize there's something wrong. So, this red notice ended up turning into an arrest, and they detained me in Colombia. They arrested me in Colombia. They sent me to a maximum security prison in Bogota for extradition. So Panama wanted to extradite me to, you know, they wanted me to go back to Panama, to face trial. And I had never opposed being, I'd always been kosher with the whole process and the indictment. We had we had assigned an attorney and everything, so it was just all way too weird. But 2 weeks in, we get we file for bail and it gets approved, and we pay $100,000 in bail, which was also very weird because bail is normally set at 10% of the value of the damage, which is $200,000. Um, but whatever, we paid the bail, and the weird thing is that they never let me free. So I spent 6 months in Colombia in prison, detained, despite I had already paid bail. After which, it went to the Supreme Court in Panama, and a judge ruled it unconstitutional, and they immediately let me free in Colombia. That's kind of like a parenthesis, but a lot of fun stuff happened in between, trust me.
Yeah, so tell me more about being detained in a maximum security prison in Colombia as a guy
Ah,
that's,
man.
grown up basically in London and gone to US university.
So,
That's like something out of a movie.
so listen, like I spent my summers in Jamaica. My mom's family is from there, so I had been used to being seen as an outsider, because when you're white in Jamaica, it's kind of like I don't know, like being black in Milan. I don't know. It's just you're noticeable. Okay. Um, I got that kind of same sense of kind of like the reverse discrimination kind of thing. Um, and I get to this prison, and first of all, let's get a couple things straight. News reports said that I was the nephew of the ex-president, which was false. They also said that I had I had robbed the government of $14 million, which was also false. And secondly, and thirdly, I had this very white, pale white face with blue eyes and blonde hair. Under, I was 28 at the time, walking into a prison where the average age is about 42. So I was basically like a wounded gazelle in the Serengeti. Right, I was prime beef. Um, and the first month was tough. The first month was tough. My stuff was stolen from me, my bed, my pillow. I had to sleep on a slab of concrete. They would extort my family whenever they would leave from the visitors from visiting hours. So the people that were in the visiting in the visitors area, they would see who would come visit you, and then outside they would extort your family. There were a lot of sticky situations. I got into a bunch of fights. Um, Kind of standing my ground kind of thing. Never like willingly, just I had to stand my ground because just those are just prison politics. If you were shown as weak, then people, trouble would just multiply for you. But then I started kind of being me, and I started talking up the guards and trying to understand what were the politics of the prison, right? And I realized that there was a big problem with the guards controlling the prison population. Um, and I came up with this idea. I got a guard to bring in a phone for me. He said, if you get that phone found, then you'll be charged for another 6 months for an actual crime. You've like right now you're in prison, but you haven't been charged for a crime. Having a phone in prison, that is a crime in Colombia. So I said, doesn't matter, I'm going to take the risk. So I asked them specifically for a Galaxy S7, which could go underwater. And that was kind of my strategy to hide it. And it worked because it was never found throughout the 6 months. Um, and then I had this hacked SIM card that allowed me to have unlimited data. So so this is where it gets really interesting, guys. Um, People saw this phone on me. And they said, I want a phone. So now all of a sudden the big bad guy wants me to help him. I said, okay. Well, you got to make sure that the other big bad guy doesn't touch me. So if you get me that, if you protect me, I'm gonna get you a phone. So he honored his side of the deal, and I got him his phone. But a phone is kind of useless if you don't have any data. Now I wasn't gonna give them a SIM card, so I would share my data with with call them my friends. On a daily basis, I would change the password. So if you weren't cool with me, you wouldn't have any data. I was the ISP. Okay, I became the ISP. All of a sudden, people were being nice to me. People were being very civil, very respectful, and I was cool about it. You see, guys, there's no need to fight. And guess what? The guards knew that I had a phone and that everyone was getting a phone, but because it decreased the amount of conflict that they had to deal with, they allowed people to keep their phones. So it was a win-win. Um, and then all of a sudden they wanted movies. Oh, you want movies? Yeah, I can get you movies, but you're gonna owe me one. So I kind of had this credit system where people owed me favors. There's no money in prison. Remember, there's no money. So let's just say that the value comes from respect um, and people owing you favors. Okay, and I would give people movies. I would get them music. I would get them apps. Um, and then it would get really funny because some of them would be like, "Come on, man, just give it. Don't be so Jewish on me. Just give me a good movie. I'll give them a good movie." And then they said, "But man, it has no subtitles." I said, "You never said anything about subtitles. That's going to cost you extra." So I would say, "Listen, that's called freemium, my friend. That is freemium. Welcome to the freemium economy." Um, and this was then me being funny. At times, I would take these micro SD cards, and I would fill them up with movies, and I would have like five of them, and they would be passed around by everyone. And sometimes I would just fill them up with porn, with gay porn, and that was great. That was fantastic because you would you would hear the scream in the middle of the night, like someone just cursing a fucking Mayer, and that was just so gratifying because that was like kind of being back in high school. Um, and Yeah, so it was very interesting. It was very interesting. Yeah.
What are some other interesting stories, or what's your favorite story of something that happened while you were
Well,
there?
I would say that throughout this entire, I'm gonna like just picture this. Everyone else that's in prison is there with a specific timeline. They've been arrested and they've been charged and they've been convicted for a certain period of time. I was there without a timeline. I didn't know whether I was leaving tomorrow, another next week, or next month. And weeks turned into months and months into several months, and I lost hope, right? So I said, I need to make this loud. I need the world to know that this is happening. Because then this was the other part. I said, what about Criptext? How am I gonna how am I gonna survive after this is done? Like I can't shove this under the rug. It's way too big. So the only way I considered to turn this into my favor, I said, was making it bigger willfully, like per design. So I decided to contact a few reporters um, and tell them what was going on, but they weren't really biting the story. Then Panama Papers came about, and this was May 2015, 2016. And I had this reporter, Thomas Fox Brewster, who's a cyber reporter from Forbes, and he was interested in it, but he said, I need some more beef. And I said, well, I have a great idea. And I remembered the story of the Facebook founder, Mark Zuckerberg, having given away the software, the Synapse software that Microsoft offered to buy for $1 million. He gave it away for free, and as a big fuck you to Microsoft. I'm not sure I should say those bad words in your program, but sorry.
You're
Um,
more than welcome.
okay, so I said, what better way to say fuck you to a government um, than to releasing the software that I sold to them for free? So the contract had ended by then, so I could do it. Plus, there was also the variable that people thought I was guilty, that there was never any software. So I had to demonstrate that this existed. Um, so I decided to launch the app from prison. So it wasn't just me. So the Criptext team was behind me the entire time. No one left the company. My partners at the time were working on getting this enterprise solution consumer friendly, and we launched it. We launched it from prison just to make a statement, and it kind of worked. And what's more was that I had a whole user base of narcos from prison that wanted to use my app. And I think that was the craziest thing. It's kind of like that you had kind of like the entire ecosystem. I kind of realized that people who went to prison didn't necessarily get any better. Like they don't come out any better having gone to prison. In fact, they can come out even worse because now they're even more connected, right? So like, oh man, I was doing cocaine. Now I can do heroin. Thanks, man. When I come out, we'll do heroin together. So it's kind of like that. So all of a sudden, I was the one to put them in secure communications. Um, but the statement was heard loud and clear. It, it it exerted a lot of pressure to the government in Panama. And a month later, I was released from prison. But that didn't go that didn't go as planned. That didn't go without a hiccup.
What happened?
Um, so first of all, again, well, one of the things I used to do when I was in prison is I had access to my credit card. Well, I had everything. Like I still had my phone and I had an Android, so I could install this VPN and this location changer, so I could access my bank account. Um, and I even so earlier you and I were talking about Miguel from Shipify, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he touched base. Miguel was a good friend of mine, and he touched base with me while I was in prison. He was concerned for me and said, "How are you doing?" And he says, "Well, not too good. Shopify is, in his last leg. I don't think we can raise capital. We got great leads, we got great traction, but people just don't trust us. We just need that little bit of capital to kind of like start the domino effect." And I said, "Well, how much do you need?" He says, "I need about $15,000." And I said, "Okay, well, I'll invest in your company, um, and I'll connect you with some investors." So while I was in prison, I wired him $50,000 from my prison cell, and and then I put him in touch with a few people, and he ended up closing a $1 million round that same month. Um, so I was very proud of that because I think it's a really fun VC story. Because VC stories really don't get fun, except for that one, I would say. Um, and and then while I was in prison, I would buy stuff from Amazon and have them shipped to Miami, where we had an apartment. Then my sister was living there. She would travel to Colombia once a month. She would bring them to prison for me. One of the things that I bought was a Ninja Turtle onesie. All right. And it was for a specific reason. No one really understood, but they brought it in. I had it brought into prison. And it was my extradition suit. The president of Panama is nicknamed the Turtle because he's slow and gets nothing done. So I wanted to make sure that if he was having a laugh at me, that I would have the last laugh by getting to Panama, extradited, arriving in a Ninja Turtle outfit. Um, and I was woken up one morning in June 24th. So yesterday was actually 2 years since I left prison. And the guard says, pack up your stuff. You're leaving." And in my mind, that meant, well, I'm being extradited to Panama. I guess this is it. Keep in mind that being extradited to a country that was persecuting you for the last year and a half was a scary thing. Like I wasn't sure what was going to happen once I got to Panama. There was no indication that my rights would be protected. Um, it was just, I would say, it was a very uncertain moment. But there was one thing that I was very confident about, was that whatever it was, I was going to have my laugh at it. And so the guy says, pack up your stuff. So I suit up. I put on my Ninja Turtle outfit. My cellmates, they couldn't believe what I was doing, and I walk out of the cell, and the 120 inmates that were in my cell block, they start having a laugh. They're hysterically laughing. They can't believe what I'm doing. Even the guard says, "Well, I guess there's nothing in the books that says you can't go out like that." But fuck, really? I walk out of the prison block. So it's a compound with, let's say, I would say about 8 different buildings, and my prison block was like smack down in the center. And as I walk out, I'm being escorted by four prison guards, and in front of me, I'm looking at these immigration officers, and there's an immigration vehicle there, and they start getting into a discussion. Now, I'm not really overhearing what they're saying because it's pretty far away from me, but I could tell they were disagreeing on something. And then it kind of escalates into a big argument, a fight of sorts. And then they pull me back into the building, and I say, what's going on? And they don't say anything. And then all of a sudden, I see my lawyer. My Colombian lawyer is there. He goes, Mayer, what's going on is that these immigration officers want to take you in and deport you. I said, but isn't that what's going on? Like, isn't that what's supposed to happen? He says, no, you're being set free. There's no warrant for your deportation. They have no right to be here. Um, so it was so that was an that was a shocking surprise. Now, these officers, these immigration officers, they've seen me by now. I'm in a bright green Ninja Turtle suit. Okay, they can't lose me. So my lawyer says, "Listen, let's do something. We're gonna walk out of this prison, um, and everything's gonna be fine." I said, "That is not gonna work out." So the prison guards, the prison tells the immigration to step out. They kick the immigration out of the building, and they're waiting for me right outside of prison building, the prison compound. And my lawyer tells me, go ahead and just put on some normal clothes, some jeans, a t-shirt, and a hat. And I do so. I take a selfie. I publish it on Facebook and Instagram. Oh, I think it was Facebook. And and at this point, the prison guards asked me, "Where the hell did you get the phone?" And they said, "Well, actually, forget that. I was going to ask you how'd you got it in, but I want to know how you actually got it out, because I had to actually slip out the phone because I wanted to keep all these pictures. I had taken pictures and videos of everything. I documented everything I went through. Um, and the guard, he took the picture for me. He says, "Listen, this is I don't even know if this is even legal because it feels wrong, but really there's nothing on the books that says I can't do it. But go ahead." So I take a he takes a picture of me with my liberation warrant, it's called, and I walk out of prison, right past the immigration guards who are peeking through the fence, looking for the guy in green. Okay, and I just walked right by them. It was clearly something arbitrarily wrong that they were doing, and we didn't find out until later that they had they had devised a plan with the Panamanian government, to just basically kidnap me right out of prison and put me in a plane and be sent to Panama. Now, that can't be done not just by any immigration, but immigration in Colombia at least. They don't have any jurisdiction inside the country, only in the borders and airports. So everything that they were doing was illegal. And that's a story how I came out of prison. Um, and then I published a picture of me coming out of prison with a Ninja Turtle outfit, and of course the president of Panama didn't like that. He didn't like that at all. And he sent a message to me through some friend of his who was friends of a relative of mine, and I sent a message back. I said, well, if he didn't find that funny, try spending 6 months in prison. That ain't funny either. So that was the story with the Ninja Turtle outfit. Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. So, looking over, it's been 2 years now. What do you think happened? Why did they want to go after you so bad? And why so hard?
Well, it turns out that they wanted the ex-president's head on a stake, and they went out on a witch hunt to get every member of his family, and that included my father, who was in a relationship with the president's sister. Um, they couldn't get to my father. My father was living in Israel, and they couldn't get to him. And so they got to me as bait. They went after me to get me as bait to go after my dad, so my dad could basically throw the ex-president under the bus. I really don't know what their strategy was, but that's as close as I can come to rationalizing something that makes sense. Um, and you know what? The craziness doesn't end there. The when I came out of prison, even though I had, it was all over the news that I had been granted my liberation, um, and um, and that everything was duly executed. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Vice President of Panama, they officially stated, in their official statement, they declared that I was a fugitive and that I had bribed my way out of prison and that I escaped the Colombian justice system. And it was all a lie. 2 days later, there was no they retracted the official statement without an official um, without an official statement, and we called them out on it. And then Tom at Forbes, he also wrote about it because they literally just deleted all tweets and articles that they published on their website, and it was just disgusting. It was literally banana republic. It was the definition of banana republic politics. Um, and looking back, it hasn't stopped. Like, this is, I'll be very honest, from a economic perspective, you look at this country, it was a country that was growing at double digits, um, in the last presidency. And since this new president came about, it's been falling apart. The country's been falling apart. Growth has been under 4%, unemployment increasing, insecurity has been increasing. Everything's just plummeting. And the reason is because this guy is only focused on persecuting the last government, and getting the ex-president behind bars. And it seems like these people can't shit and piss at the same time. Excuse my French, but they can't run a government and persecute the previous government at the same time. And they've done both. They spread themselves so thin doing both that they didn't do any of them right. So they went after me, and it just burst all over their faces. And they tried to run a country for the last 4 years, and it's mayhem, in this small little 3.5 million person country. But um, I guess that's the only way I would say that's the only reason behind all this is they wanted bait. I think they got a lot more than what they expected because, media wise, in terms of public opinion, everyone sided with me. Everyone sided with me. I was very transparent. I published all the evidence that I had. Um, I had published it, publicly on Twitter and social media, and everyone was able to verify that there was something wrong here. This is way too fishy. But then again, like, you can't just go to prison just like that. But then when the details started to emerge, people realized that this was illegal what they had done. Later that year, Interpol declared the red notice that they made for me, I would say. They declared it illegal, and they went ahead and deleted all records of my being in the Interpol, because they realized that Panama, couldn't substantiate the information that they had given to them. So basically, they gave Interpol fake information to be able to round me up. Let's put it that way.
So after all of this, you're back in Panama. Why did you decide to go back there, if it was your decision at all?
Oh no, yeah, it wasn't a decision because I was just picked up in the middle of the street in Colombia 3 months after coming out of prison. I had filed for, what you call it, asylum. Um, and then when they denied the petition, the day they denied my asylum petition, I was picked up on the streets of Colombia by immigration again illegally, and I was taken to the nearest airport and put on a commercial flight to Panama. I had no passport with me, nothing. There's no records that I ever came into the country, basically. Um, and and they drove me to the airport as if they had just robbed the bank, and these were actual policemen. So it was just crooked. It was just crooked, and it made things start to piece together um, when you realize that the director of the police in Panama is like college friends with the director of immigration in Colombia, and that the director of the Ministry of Security went to Colombia 10 days before my liberation for 4 days, basically to put this plan together. In fact, I was ordered to be liberated on the 6th of June, but I wasn't liberated until the 24th. So Panama halted the decision, like the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they halted the decision until for 20 days, so that they could put that plan together. So I mean, they brought me to Panama, and as soon as I get to Panama, I get served a new case alleging corruption. And it was a double jeopardy. Basically, you can't be investigated twice for the same actions for the same case. I would say this time they were claiming corruption, and it was just, in my point of view, it was just a big act to just have another medium to which they could arrest me. Because once you have a new investigation, the prosecutor could order your arrest. And I think that's what they wanted. But when I came to Panama, the support was so big that I think that they were dissuaded from going against me. So so I had to go for depositions for like 2 days, 2 straight days. It was a scary it was a scary situation going to the mouth of the beast. It was not pretty at all. And since then, I've been restricted from leaving the country. Um, I've been restricted from speaking out publicly. Every time I say something in my favor or against the government and what they're doing against me, they will tighten up their grip against me or against someone else in my family. Um, and that's basically the MO for the last 4 years. So for 3 years for 2 years since I came back, I haven't been able to leave the country. I had a serious relapse of my health issues, and I had to go to London to go visit my doctor, and they wouldn't allow me to go. So yeah, that's the rodeo we're playing.
Wow, so you're really taking some risk here by sharing your story like this. Government could decide to come back at you, or you really are risking something.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. I mean, well, you know what, dude? I've paid the big once you've paid the most expensive price to pay, which is prison, you're kind of in, invulnerable, I would say, to anything else they could do to you. So what else can they do to me at this point? They have less than a year left in their government. They are by far the less popular government in the Panamanian history, even more so than the dictatorship of Manuel Noriega. Even he was more popular than this president. So at this point, to be honest, I really don't care. Um, yeah, I really don't care. Plus, the only thing that I can think of right now is not about myself, but my company. We've been building the most secure email service in the world for the last 10 months. And I think this story goes a long way into explaining why we're doing it. Um, the fact that throughout this persecution, all our communications were being tapped, all our emails were being read by the government, just really led me to believe that I had to create something, solve a problem that was not just happening to me, but I'm pretty sure that it's happening around the world. Sometimes we're too far away to see what happens in these emerging markets, Sometimes not even, you don't even have to go to emerging markets. Like in the US, it's happened. But that's the only thing I care about. I care about the impact that Cryptex can bring to the world, the benefit it could do to global privacy. And I think this podcast is worth the risk.
So after all of this experience and also your experience with Criptext and getting into encryption and secure messaging, what are some of the things that people should be worried about and steps they can be taking to not fall into problems with their communications?
So first of all, there's the dragnet method that governments use, where they are just collecting all data, right? They're going to companies like Google and they're saying, just give me all the data you have on people fitting this description. So Panamanians, between the ages X, Y, Z, and let's say with this name, with this last name. And it's like this dragnet method where they can just they you know they can just pick up on everything and anything they want. I don't know if they're doing it on WhatsApp. I really don't think so, because WhatsApp is on the signal encryption. But I would say that when it comes to email, it's a totally different ballgame. I know that for a fact that Panama has already gotten uh, the the banking information of the Swiss banking information of Panamanian residents, and it's a very public thing. So in that perspective, I wouldn't even trust a Proton Mail, and Proton Mail, even though it's encrypted, they actually host the keys, the encryption keys to to your to your messages. So theoretically, if they had to comply, they could. If they had to comply with the government, they could. And if it's already happening in the Swiss banking industry, why wouldn't it happen in the communication industry? Especially, you know, think about it. It's a small country like Panama versus um, versus a PR disaster that could be for them. So they comply. Um, so I would say that people have to be very much aware that everything they say that's hosted on these cloud services um, could be tapped into, not just by governments but by private enterprises as well. Because at the end of the day, you know, information is king. Information is king, and in the game of power, the currency is information. That's what I've come to learn over these last 4 years.
So you get out of prison, you get taken back to Panama, and you can't leave. What happens next?
So we rebranded Cryptex. Cryptex has the existing Cryptex service, the Gmail service, has been rebranded to Cryptex for Gmail, and we created a new domain for that, cryptexgmail.com, all to leave space for Cryptex as a brand to be launched in August. We're thinking August 15th. Um, and yeah, I mean, maybe give or take a week, but I've been using the product, and it's it's it, I'm not going to say it's amazing, because it just works. And to see something work is cool. It's simple. The fact that it works with such a unique encryption, and I know I'm being very vague with not sharing any of the details at this point, all you needed to do is to work, because I don't need any bells and whistles. All we need to do is to make sure that we're protecting users' privacy, and we're doing things differently. And to use it every day as if it were any other email app, um, that kind of hits the nail on the head. Beyond that, we can open up tomorrow to be a platform where people could build extensions and tools that work on top of the Cryptex app. So we can expand into becoming a platform once we've established the service as a reliable, secure email service. So that's the most important part, and I'm happy to say that things are going really well.
One of the most important things in a startup is keeping the team motivated and making sure that you get through all sorts of adversity. And you've definitely come through a lot more adversity than a lot of companies do. Most of the time, they're worried about potentially running out of money or an engineer is leaving. you're in prison. You launched a company from prison. So how did you do that, and what happened with the team? Did you have people leave? Were you able to keep it together? What went on?
Keeping the team or the dream together, keeping it alive, no matter what comes against you, what happens. Um, and you know what? Like ironically, and I said this at the beginning, that there's like the degree of serendipity with the story goes beyond anything I've ever heard in Silicon Valley. It's not the typical they ran into each other at a coffee shop story. Okay, so that story. So by November last year, we're almost running out of cash, and no one wanted to take our meetings. No VCs wanted to invest in us. We were toxic. You know, there was just this entire story that made it very sketchy. Plus, I was in Panama. I couldn't travel to the US. I couldn't leave the country. So it was very hard to fundraise that way. Um, and, the most amazing thing happened. I get a call from my lawyer. He says, listen, I've got a special friend that wants to meet you. And, and, he says, this friend of mine, her name is Marina Acton, and she's a privacy activist. And she ran into your story, your Forbes story, and she'd like to meet you. And I speak to Marina Acton, who happens to be an investor from Silicon Valley, and she hears my story. I tell her all about the persecution, and she could totally um, familiarize herself with the story because she had been through a similar situation coming from Europe, Eastern Europe, and and she says, well, what's your vision? I explained to her that, I want to build the most secure email service in the world. And she says, well, I'd be willing to back you up. And by end of November last year, we closed $1 million investment with Marina and some other investors, thanks to her connections. And and here we are. I mean, so ironically, that story, as I said to you, if you make it big enough, like it could be used as in your advantage, right? So I was seen in her point of view as a victim and not as a sketchy con artist. And that was my goal when I devised the plan of launching the app from prison. Um, and I think that's the definition of an angel investor, because like she literally came down as an angel and invested when no one could, in probably the most unlikeliest of situations. So, I mean, that's if I can resume the last 3 or 4 years, if I could condense it into one thing, it's that like you can turn every bad situation into a positive. It just depends on how you spin it, right? So I always say, um, I always tell entrepreneurs that you know we all have problems, and it's kind of like the wind. You don't see it, you don't feel it. You don't see it, but you can feel it. Like there are problems, you can go against it, but you're going to tire out. Okay, try running against the wind; it's going to beat you. Um, and if you just do nothing about it, it's going to take you away. It's going to take you adrift, and you'll be toast. So what do? Well, you use it in your advantage. You take it, you manipulate it in your advantage to take it where you want to go. And that's what sailing is all about. You got to sail through your problems. So you tack the wind, and you zigzag around it. And it's not a straight line. That's why it's a zigzag motion. So I basically had to take 3 steps back to take 5 steps forward, in a zigzag motion. And I think that's what the cryptic story is all about. And throughout that, there's team spirit, there's cohesiveness, there's solidarity, there is innovation, there is impact, and all the many more things that we love about startups that make startups really unique.
So you just told a story that for especially people from the US who don't know anything about Latin America, don't have much experience, they're probably scared shitless about going into Latin America after hearing your story. And your story is really, really crazy. And I would say it's not representative of any of our experience. So, do you have any advice for why people should look at Latin America? Or are you so scarred from what's happened that you wouldn't recommend it?
Um, one of the companies that I invested in was is called Selena, and it's basically, if I could put it in a nutshell, it's the WeWork of hospitality. Okay, it's a hostel chain that has legitimized the idea of staying in a cheap hotel, and it has made it cool, and it is growing like crazy globally. It started out in Panama by two Israelis, and they are not opening up in countries like the U.S. They're opening up in places where people want to travel to, and that's Costa Rica, Colombia, Panama, and they're following the route of the backpacker, of the traveler, of the what's called the traveling nomad, and they're opening up in all these places. And the unit economics in Latin America are just beautiful because you can provide an amazing experience, um, an amazing amount of value at just the same prices as you do in the at the same price as you do in the U.S. So that's just one example of growth in the region, and arbitrage opportunities that there exist for investors. For example, I think that the startups in the U.S. are highly overvalued, and there's too many investors chasing too few startups, and that's what's leaving startups that are not don't even have a product to just raise capital on a whim. Um, and I think that there's great software, there's great talent in Latin America that, if harnessed properly, and if 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 invested by the right people, then what you could see is a great opportunity for VCs and venture capital to grow beyond the scope that they have in the US. Um, and I think you're seeing that in Asia. You're seeing more of it in Latin America. Latin America, I would say, is a laggard. Um, Not as much as Africa, but I would say when it comes to emerging markets, Southeast Asia, for example, is leading the pack. But there's a great opportunity in Latin America. There's great talent, um, and maybe all it needs is a little push. So for angel investing, there's a crazy amount of opportunities in Latin America at a fraction of the cost. So you can provide as much value as you can to a startup in the U.S., but with a lot higher return and probably just as much risk.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with being able to be more capital efficient and that there's great talent in Latin America being able to solve problems. We think that at Magma, we're basically every dollar that we invest is worth 10 more compared to if that company was in Silicon Valley. The money just goes so much farther. So I'm glad that you think similarly.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I agree. It's you and I were talking previously. It's about creating that bridge. Like there's also another problem in Latin America, which is an opportunity for investors and VCs, which is there's a lot of money in Latin America, but it's not tech money. It's not smart money. They don't know how to invest in tech, and they don't know how to provide more value beyond the money that they invest. And I think that's the opportunity that that VCs could capitalize on, because these startups in Latin America, they don't need as much money as they need connections and counsel. That's all it is. They just need a little push.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think that there's a huge opportunity to help family offices and family owned businesses and wealthy entrepreneurs that have made money outside of tech into tech and really understand it. And we take that as a core part of our thesis at Magma. And that's how we were able to work with 8 family offices from Chile as part of our second fund and work with many family offices from around the region. Maybe they didn't, even if they didn't invest this time, are likely to work with us in the future. And as we show them, you know, options for co-investing and connections to entrepreneurs to really get a pulse of what's going on. So I think it's really important. So I had another question for you. What are some of your books that you like to recommend to people that maybe have helped either while you were in prison or just as an entrepreneur?
Well, I gotta say, I've always liked Malcolm Gladwell, but I read his book even before prison. But while I was in prison, I read David and Goliath, and I just found it awesome because I thought it was so close to the world of startups, of being little guys, and how being little has that advantage. And it was also very beneficial in that point where I was in my life, where you know I had I had fallen so far down that you can't fall any deeper. So, being the little guy or being at a disadvantage, I had the advantage of being able to pull a stunt like the one I pulled, without with very little downside. And I would say, yeah, the David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell is a fantastic book. Zero to One is awesome. Zero to One is great by Peter Thiel. I think for those who want to understand more the mindset of the VC, and I've always said this to entrepreneurs, if they want to raise capital, they gotta get into the mind of the person that invests in it, in venture capital. So it's a good book. It's a short book, and it goes straight to the point for you to understand how VCs think. Um, I also like I also like, believe it or not, when it comes to podcasts, um, I like the daily, and it has nothing to do with startups. You see, for the same reason, like I don't watch Silicon Valley, the HBO show, because it's just too close to home. Sometimes you want to disconnect from the reality you're living. So I often just listen to the daily. That's like my number one podcast of the day. I start the day with the daily. I like what Bitcoin did. Um, I haven't gotten deep into cryptocurrencies, but I find that some of the discussions that are had in this podcast are very unbiased, because a lot of people who are in the world of Bitcoin are very defensive about Bitcoin. Um, and I cannot I cannot end it without saying that Masters of Scale is one of the best startup oriented podcasts out there. I love it. And I once wrote a message to Reed Hoffman. I once wrote him a message. I said, I sent it over Twitter because he said that, right, and you've probably heard this before, said in his podcast, building a startup is like assembling a plane on a free fall. And I said, well, building a startup while being persecuted by a government and being in prison, that's like being assembling a plane on free fall with your hands and feet tied. I never got a reply, but maybe one day, I don't know, maybe one day he'll hear the story, and he'll agree.
That's great. Well, we'll tweet him a link to the podcast. Hopefully, he hears it. Still a chance.
Yeah, sure thing, sure thing.
So, you've been through a lot. And if you could go back to give yourself advice from when you were just starting the company, knowing what you know today, after being through prison and all of this crazy story, what advice would you give yourself?
Um, Trust yourself. I would say don't be afraid to fuck up. Um, like the pain of the fall doesn't hurt as much as we imagine it will. That's the only reason we kind of hesitate to take the leaps. Um, I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't change a single thing. I think life is about growing from your experiences. That's what the entrepreneurial journey is all about. You become a better entrepreneur by learning of your mistakes, of the pitfalls along the way. Um, in that sense, it's a lesson that I could not have learned in college or any other. Very, very few people will have the unfortunate circumstances to live such an experience. So it's a lesson that is quite valuable to me. And I would say, um, if I could tell Mayer 4 years ago, before he started Criptext, I would say, don't be afraid to fuck up, because I think I hesitated a lot by being a little more cautious, which is weird because entrepreneurs, they're not risk averse people. They're risk prone people. And even though I'm risk prone, no one likes to feel pain, right? But there's a lot of pain involved in the entrepreneurial journey. and I can assure you it's not as bad as you imagine it to be.
Well, Mayer, that's great advice. Really thank you for sharing your story and taking the time and also taking the risk to share it with me. Really enjoyed it, and I think it's a really good spot to stop. So thanks again, and I really, really appreciate you taking your time to do this.
Thanks, man. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope your listeners have enjoyed it. And yeah, if you're listening out there, don't hesitate to tweet at me. I'd be happy to share some advice and some points of views.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of Crossing Borders. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want more info on what happened to Mayer, check out the Forbes article called Meet the Entrepreneur Who Launched a WhatsApp Rival from a Colombian Prison. As always, please share this with friends who you think might enjoy it. And, we'd always love to get more ratings on iTunes and Stitcher, so please do if you like the podcast. Thanks to Angel and Sophia for helping with the production, and for Julianne from Seed Stars for making the intro. Hope you have a good rest of your day.